name it, my classes at Marist start in 2 weeks. Do you mind coming to Atlanta and introducing me that way to my students? That was quite the introduction. Thank you for that. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin my remarks with you this afternoon with a kind of admittance of incompetence. How about that for a beginning? I'm setting the bar very low, okay? Incompetent because I simply cannot find the words to adequately express my appreciation for the invitation to be with you here today. This place is extraordinary. I'd heard of Chautauqua, of course. In fact, I was born in Ithaca, though I moved away when I was an infant, so I don't remember it much. But I'd heard of Chautauqua, of course, but I was not expecting this. What you have been able to not only build, but to maintain here is something else. I mean, it is like an oasis, isn't it? It's an oasis of honest intellectual inquiry, freedom of thought, interfaith dialogue in an otherwise desert of conspiracy theories, lies, bullying. So I cannot tell you how much of an honor it is to be with you here today. I think it was our speaker this morning, also from Atlanta, who put it this way. If you heard her remarks in the auditorium over there, she had said during opening remarks, right? She said, Chautauqua is the most American thing about America, right? She's right about that. So, these are very perilous times to be talking about something like the long and tragic history of anti-Semitism. We know, all of us, that pain and suffering are not exceptions to the human condition, but that they are inevitable players in the drama of our lives. But still, having said that, the enormity of sorrow that so many are carrying right now, given the still ongoing and evolving tragedy post-October 7th, is placing inexhaustible demands on people's hearts. And if you are among those who are so directly impacted by this profound tragedy, no doubt you received needed words of encouragement, support from friends, family members, rabbis, imams. And from well outside those very inner circles, I just want to offer my own quiet word of encouragement. Just as a neighbor from Atlanta, just to say that I hope you're doing okay. And that I share with all of you that prayer, no doubt, that we hold so deep in that place where truth is kept, that peace will return to that extraordinary place very soon. Amen to that. You know, as a teacher in a Catholic school, and by the way, if you read the amazing article about myself in today's edition of it was quite lovely to see myself on the front page. If you read the article, they noted that I was from Marist College. I'm not from Marist College. I'm from Marist School in Atlanta. Same Catholic religious order, by the way. There are many Marist schools all over the world. In fact, when I saw that mistake in the article, I was reminded of this kind of funny story where I was nearly the varsity boys soccer coach at Marist School for nearly 30 years, and I would run a summer camp, trying to raise some extra income. And some years ago, at 8:45 a.m., first day of camp, Monday morning, camp starts at 9 a.m., I got this phone call from a very desperate mother whose 9-year-old daughter was signed up for the camp, and she said, "Brendan," she said, "I've been driving all over campus and I cannot find where you are. Please help me locate where the camp is." And so we talked. You can see where this is going. And I quickly learned that she actually thought the camp was at Marist College in New York. And the first thing I said to her was, "Ma'am, you are not going to make the 9 o'clock start time for camp today." And then very quickly refunded her money. But as a teacher in a Catholic school, I am very often asked why I have dedicated my professional life as an educator to teach the history of the Holocaust. I'm asked this question all the time. People sometimes even ask me if I'm Jewish. Brendan Michael Murphy, probably not. But of course, we know that the crimes known as the Holocaust, they are an indelible stain on human history. The collective shame experienced for the utter degradation of the person should give rise within all of us an authentic repentance and an acceptance of responsibility to promote the dignity of each person in this, our common home, as we like to say in the Catholic Church. There is a duty for all of us, not only to study the history of the Holocaust, but also to remember it. As Pope Francis said one time, because there is no future without memory. Remembering what happened should rightly awaken the conscience of all of us. And so I don't understand why I am so often asked this question: why do you teach the Holocaust? And as a Catholic, we have to ask ourselves how such a tragedy as this could occur in the heart of European Christendom. History provides some answers. It is clear how, for nearly 2,000 years, Christian anti-Judaism laid the groundwork for racial, genocidal antisemitism by stigmatizing Judaism and Jews themselves for opprobrium and contempt, hatred. Nazi theories tragically found fertile soil in which to grow into an unprecedented attempt at complete genocide. Thankfully, my students don't ask me this question: why do you teach the Holocaust? They're more inclined to ask me why they have to study history at all. Well, we do so, as I explained to my students, we study history to reveal, of course, how much of it still lives within all of us today. The study of history is meant to be a humanizing endeavor. It's a journey through the past that helps us reconsider how we understand ourselves as human beings. It's a subject, history, that should engage the heart, help develop better judgment, teach empathy. But this is not easy. I can tell you, as one who's been doing it for over 3 decades now. History, you may remember from your own high school years, is often taught from a kind of objective arm's length. It is all too often the piling on of names, dates, and facts. It's Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and DBQs and essays and all the rest. But this objectivism, it keeps us from forming relationships with the things of this world. It keeps the past at a safe distance. But when we distance ourselves from something, it becomes an object. And when it becomes an object, it no longer has life. And when it is lifeless, it can no longer touch us, or better yet, transform us. And so the study of history is meant to be transformative. And so this afternoon, I want to share with you one such story of transformation. This is a terribly difficult story to tell. It is one fraught with enormous suffering, hatred, violence. But it is not a story entirely without hope, as we'll see. The long and tragic history of anti-Semitism can trace its origins, mainly, to the first centuries of Christianity, where Christian theologians developed 2 pernicious ideologies, theologies, ideas that would become foundational pillars upon which a nearly 2,000-year-old tradition of Christian anti-Semitism would be built. The first of these 2 ideas was a hideous accusation developed very early by early Christian theologians, which said that Jews were collectively responsible for the death of Christ, which of course we know is not historically accurate. Jews did not crucify people. We know, of course, that crucifixion was a Roman form of punishment. But not only is this accusation not historically correct, but perhaps even more importantly, it is not theologically correct either. Because, of course, for any of us here this afternoon who might, in fact, identify as a Christian, what does Christianity say? Who is responsible for the death of Christ? Yes, I am. We are. Nonetheless, this accusation that the Jews were collectively responsible for the death of Christ becomes deeply embedded in Christian self-understanding. The second of these 2 teachings, which will be equally as damaging as the first, essentially says this: that largely as a consequence of, in air quotes, the Jews having killed Christ, God has now said to the Jews, enough, and has broken the covenant with them, leaving Jews now cursed and rejected, condemned. And God early Christian theologians had said, has now formed a new covenant with Christianity, known in academic circles as the myth of supersession, or sometimes referred to as replacement theology. These two teachings, as I say, will become foundational pillars upon which this tradition of Christian anti-Semitism would grow. Encouraged and inspired by these two teachings, Christian authorities and mobs through the centuries will destroy synagogues, burn Jewish homes, desecrate cemeteries. Jews themselves will be dehumanized, isolated, expelled, massacred. This story is not an easy one to tell, but it is an essential story to hear. And I have to tell you, it is a story that I want to tell through art. But alas, as you can see, there is no projection here. Chautauqua is very traditional, which I admire. By the way, can I mention something? Just as an aside, y'all are making me very nervous. I know I kind of do this as a high school teacher for a living, but as a high school teacher, I'm just not always used to people actually listening to me. Okay? This is true. So, all the eye contact I'm receiving right now is making me very uncomfortable. So I know Ahmed had said, please turn your cell phones off, but in fact, if while I'm speaking, if you want to take your cell phones out and start taking selfies, I'll feel right at home. Please do. But listen, the story I want to share with you today, again, this story of transformation, is one best told, as I say, through art. And so given that there's no projection, guess what I've done for you? I have made 700 copies of this lovely handout. Yes, my copier at school was smoking by the time it finished. Yeah. And I have my minions here to distribute. Y'all just grab handfuls. However, before you pass these out, y'all can come up and grab your stacks. But before you pass these out, I want to say something to all of you. Please do not open these packets when you receive them. Because I want us to go through this story together. Please don't pass those out just yet. Now look, here's the deal. As you can see, I'm standing on an elevated platform. And so if you open this packet ahead of time, I will see you. And I will give you demerits. You think teachers keep their demerit slips in their classrooms? No, we take them with us at all times. So please don't open it until you are instructed. Thank you guys very much for your help. This should only take a moment. Excuse me. I'm watching you all very carefully. Sorry. Excuse me. So I want to draw your attention to the cover page of this handout that I've prepared for you. Do you all recognize that building there? Yes, that, of course, is the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, which I believe has reopened, yes? Have any of you been there? Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? It's like walking into a time machine, isn't it, to be transported back to the 12th century. Well, staying on the cover of this handout, I want to draw your attention to what you see there of Notre Dame, the front facade of the cathedral. Do you all see that? As you can see, the front facade of the Cathedral of Notre Dame is, like all cathedrals across the whole of European Christendom, the front facade of Notre Dame is an artistic tour de force. Seemingly every square inch of the front facade is covered with statuary and images. Not just the front facade, mind you, but the other exterior walls and, of course, the interior spaces are also highly ornate and decorated. Not to mention, moreover, thousands more images found in those beautifully crafted stained glass windows that adorn the walls of the cathedral. And the reason why these cathedrals, Notre Dame among them, the reason why these cathedrals were so ornate and so decorated is because they were built both by and for an illiterate population. And so, therefore, it was here, standing just outside or inside the Cathedral of Notre Dame, surrounded, as it were, by all of this imagery, where one then learned the stories of their faith tradition. I often joke with my students at Marist that these cathedrals are like medieval PowerPoint presentations. They were built intending to teach. This is not decoration. And so, having said that, I want to, in a moment, draw your attention to two statues. Don't turn the page just yet. Two statues that have been brought down to eye level. Two statues, in fact, that flank the central entrance of the cathedral, clearly demonstrating, as it were, their pride of place. Page 2. Image number 1 shows, again, the front facade of Notre Dame. Image number 2 shows you the placement of these two statues. They are statues of two women. On the left, you have a statue known as Ecclesia, Latin, meaning the church. Next page. Image number 3 shows a close-up of this statue of Ecclesia, which again means the church. And as you can see, she is shown to be crowned and triumphant, holding in her right hand there the symbol of her faith tradition, the cup, the chalice, the Eucharist, we call it, identifying her as Christianity. In her left hand, she's holding that medieval symbol for power and authority, the staff. And of course, crowned, and you can't quite make it up in this image. Well, you can see it barely. But what is that, do you see, behind her head? Yes, it's a halo. What's the symbolism there? Yes, it implies a certain status of holiness, as it were. The statue that sits alongside Ecclesia, of course, is very different. Next page. Synagogue. What is that at her feet? Yes, it's a crown that has what? Fallen. As you can see, like Ecclesia, Synagogue is also holding in her right hand the symbol of her own faith tradition. What is that, of course? Yes, the tablets of the law, the Ten Commandments, identifying her as Judaism. And moreover, like Ecclesia, Synagoga is also holding in her left hand that medieval symbol for power and authority, the staff. But of course, as you can see, the staff is what? Yes, it's broken. Not broken, mind you, through the vagaries of time. No, of course, it was made that way. And in fact, it's broken twice. Once there at her wrist, and if you can see in that shadow, it's broken again at her shoulder. And what is that wrapped around her head? Yes, it's a snake, a serpent. What's the imagery of the snake? Yes, the devil, Satan, licentiousness, evil, sin, which, as you can see, has strategically wrapped itself around what? Yes, her eyes, blinding her. And of course, there is no halo behind her head. I had said to you a moment ago that these cathedrals were like, medieval PowerPoint presentations, that such statuary is not decoration. Do you see it? What do these two statues teach? Okay, good and evil. What else?
Judaism has fallen and Christianity is taking its place.
That's it. It's the myth of supersession or replacement theology. That's what this is teaching, as well as teaching the accusation that Jews were responsible for the death of Christ. Found embodied in these two images are these two foundational teachings. The implication being that there was a time when the Jews were crowned, that is to say, covenanted. But the covenant with Jews has been broken, leaving Jews again now cursed and rejected in league with the devil. And again, a new covenant has now been forged with Christianity. And look, these two teachings, that the Jews were collectively responsible for the death of Christ, and as a consequence, God has broken the covenant with them. These were not two obscure theologies. Let me remind you where these statues are. They are not some 200 feet in the air where you can hardly see them. They are not, moreover, found in some obscure corner of the interior space of the cathedral. No. They flank the central entrance of the cathedral, which clearly demonstrates that this teaching was not some obscure theology. It was, in a word, central to Christian self-understanding. And by the way, this being the Cathedral of Notre Dame, do you all know what makes a cathedral a cathedral? Of course, my Catholic friends will know. It is, of course, found inside this building is a cathedra, which means a throne, a seat, a chair. Whose chair sits in the cathedral? The bishop's chair. What makes a cathedral is that it is the bishop's church, meaning it is the most important church in the whole of the diocese or archdiocese. My point again to say is this is not some obscure little church, you understand. And look, if it is true that these two teachings have become as important as the placement of these statues appears to emphasize, then we might expect to find these representations elsewhere. You guys, they are all over the place. Next page. In image number 5, though it's a bit faded, you can see the statuary again flanking the central entrance in the upper left-hand and right-hand corners of the image from the Bamberg Cathedral. Image number 6 shows their representations in Strasbourg. I have zoomed images as well because you can see them more clearly. By the way, if you look at image number 6, My students at Marist often comment, I think quite rightly, on the posture of ecclesia and synagoga, which is clearly intentional. The posture of ecclesia is one of confidence and triumph, whereas the posture of synagoga is one of humiliation, shame, downtrodden and defeated. Image number 7 shows their depiction at another church just about a half hour's walk away from Notre Dame in Paris. Not always, but very often, again, looking at image number 7, very often you see the staff held by synagoga to be broken twice. Do you see it there? Not always. This is in reference to the temple of Solomon, and of course, the reconstructed Second Temple, which of course, as you know, became the epicenter of Jewish life and culture in ancient Judea. That temple, as of course you know, had been destroyed how many times? Twice. Early Christian theologians, of course, would interpret the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem as God's divine condemnation, punishment, and wrath. And so the staff shown to be twice broken is a reference to this punishment, as it were. In image number 8, when you find depictions of ecclesia and synagoga shown alongside the crucifixion, there's an interesting detail that emerges. Do you see synagoga on the far right? Do you see the crown just falling in midair off the head of synagoga? Do you see that? That is because in accordance with this teaching, this replacement theology, this was the moment, again, quote unquote, when the Jews killed Christ, when God again said, enough. And so, just as it were, when Christ breathes his final breath on the cross, this was the moment God has now rejected and cursed the Jews, broken the covenant with them. So you see the crown just falling midair off the head of synagoga. In image number 9 on the bottom left, you can see that crown again just falling off the head of synagoga on the right. There's an image of a crucifix right above this stained glass window. And by the way, with image number 9, what is that synagoga is holding in her right hand there? It is the severed, decapitated head of a goat. She's holding it by the horns. Can you see it? What's up with the goat? Well, there's a line in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus references what Christians often refer to as the second coming, where, for those of you who identify as Christian, you'll know this passage in Matthew where Jesus essentially says to his followers, I will return. And he says, when I return, he says, I will separate the sheep from the goats. And the sheep, he says, will go to heaven, and the goats will go to hell. And I think ever since that line was written, goats have always kind of gotten a bad rap. They've often been associated with evil, with sin. And so the implication here in this image, I know, lost to us living in the 21st century, but you guys, truth be told, if you were living in the 13th, gazing upon this stained glass window in your local church, you would know exactly what this means. It is saying that the Jews worship Satan, the devil. This goat has been hideously, ritually sacrificed in a kind of satanic ritual. Image number 10 shows a carving in this. This is a beautiful baptismal font. It's about 3.5 feet tall. hand-carved from the 13th century out of a single block of marble. It's beautiful. It's in a small church in northern England. This is one of the three images that adorns the side of the baptismal font. Hardly needs interpretation. Ecclesia shown in the full bloom of life, in sunlight, in synagoga shown to be this dying, moribund, withered plant in darkness. You see the moon. Next page. In image number 11, again, just alongside the crucifixion, on the left, you can see the hand of God coming down from on high and crowning ecclesia. And look what the hand of God is doing to synagoga. Violently plunging that medieval broadsword straight through her skull, violently breaking the covenant. You can see the goat imagery there too. Do you see it? Y'all, this is a nearly 30-foot tall fresco painting. Y'all know what a fresco painting is, of course. That adorns nearly the entire eastern side of a small basilica church in northern Austria. And you can well imagine that it would be impossible for medieval peasants to gaze upon this enormous painting and not be inspired towards violence against Jews. And of course, what we find throughout the whole of the Middle Ages is that you have these episodic waves of Christian violence inspired by, of course, such imagery. I apologize, by the way, regarding image number 11. This is a typo. This is not from Germany. This is from a church called St. Andrew's in Turl-Maglern in Austria. Image number 12. This from Germany shows, again, on the left, the hand of God coming down and crowning ecclesia, forging a new covenant. And on the right, again, that bloodied medieval lance coming down from the heavens, violently breaking the covenant with Jews. The goat imagery as well. You know, some years ago, I came across an image that profoundly struck me. When I first saw this image, I could not get it out of my head for quite some time. I bet many, if not most, perhaps, who knows, maybe all of you have seen this image as well. Take a look at this. Next page. Now, of course, who is that? Yes, Pope John Paul II, now Saint John Paul II, and of course, where is he? Yes, he's at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Pope John Paul II came here to the holiest site in Judaism. By the way, I should tell you, for Christians, to touch those sacred stones is extraordinary. If you have not been, you must go. But Pope John Paul II came here against, by the way, the better wishes of his doctors. He was suffering from the debilitating effects of Parkinson's. But he insisted on making this pilgrimage because, as you probably know, he wanted to touch these sacred stones and ask for what? Forgiveness. Because the Pope understood something that I know all of us well understand, in fact, intuitively so, that whenever we have a relationship that is broken, be it with a spouse, a son, a daughter, a sibling, a friend, whenever we have a relationship that is broken, the only way, and we know the only way, that that relationship can be mended is that there has to be some measure of forgiveness. And so the Pope came here in hopes that this moment might just begin, perhaps, maybe, to set our two communities, Christian and Jewish, down an entirely new path. One that begins with forgiveness. And so he did, as is the tradition. He wrote his prayer down and folded it up as many times as he could. Do you all know about this? And stuffed it into the crevices of the wall. They later pulled out his prayer because everybody wanted to see what it said. And this is what it said. God of our fathers, you chose Abraham and his descendants to bring your name to the nations. We are deeply saddened by the behavior of those who, in the course of history, have caused these children of yours to suffer. And asking your forgiveness. We wish to commit ourselves to genuine brotherhood with, he says, the people of the covenant. Now that is a loaded line, given what the church had been teaching for nearly 2,000 years. But he refers to Jews as the people of the covenant because 30 years prior, the Catholic Church released a landmark statement, known in Latin as Nostra Aetate, meaning in our time, in our time. Through this proclamation, the Catholic Church stood up and effectively announced to the world that we were wrong. That the Jews, the statement makes clear, never should have collectively been blamed for the death of Christ. We were wrong about that. And secondly, the statement makes clear, the covenant with Jews has never been broken. And that we have just somehow been grafted, as it were, into that covenant. I cannot overemphasize to you how important that statement is. Now, some 10 years ago, I think it was now, Pope Francis, who recently passed, came here to the United States. Y'all remember this? He went to Washington, Philadelphia, and New York. And about a year before Pope Francis came over to the United States, he began a series of meetings with his handlers at the Vatican and Rome, to put together like an appropriate itinerary for his visit. And he said, oh, I want to visit a Catholic college in America. And they said, well, you're going to be in Washington. You've got to visit Georgetown. It's the preeminent Catholic institution in America. Next to Notre Dame, of course. Let's be honest. Go Irish. I see that hat. There you go. Right? Well, if you remember anything about Pope Francis, he wasn't so much into preeminence, and he said, well, maybe something smaller. And so they found this lovely Catholic university in Philadelphia called St. Joseph's. And so on a random Tuesday afternoon, the president of St. Joseph's College gets a phone call from the Vatican. And they say, we are calling from the Vatican, and the Pope would like to visit your college. Would that be okay? And the president of St. Joseph said, what are you talking about? Well, to make a long story short, he called for an emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees. And of course, they all came running in expecting the very worst. And when he closed the door behind them, he said, the Pope is coming. And they all said, what are you talking about? Well, they decided at that meeting that they needed to somehow mark the occasion. This might be the most important thing that could happen to St. Joseph's College. And so they went big. They went big. They hired a local Philadelphia area sculptor to sculpt something appropriate to adorn their campus to mark this occasion. He wasn't quite sure what to create. And so he began a series of meetings with theologians at the college, the Archbishop of Philadelphia, others kind of brainstorming ideas. And he finished his original bronze statue just in time for the Pope's arrival, brought it over on a big crane, set it atop this lovely pedestal, and then covered it for the big unveiling. The name of that statue? Synagogue and Ecclesia. This is the statue here. Next page. Isn't that extraordinary? You can see, of course, they're both crowned. We understand the symbolism there. They are, in effect, mirrored, symmetrical representations of each other, implying a kind of equality. And, of course, they're both holding their sacred text, but what are they doing? They are learning from each other. When I first saw this image in an article in the New York Times in 2015, I was profoundly struck by it. And it began this quest in my heart to bring a version of this statue to our campus in Atlanta at Marist School. And so I called the artist. He's got a website with contact information. And I asked if he could, in fact, make a second full-sized edition of this statue. And of course, he said he would. But then he told me how much it costs. It's quite expensive. And some months later, I was giving a lecture at Marist to the parents on the history of Christian anti-Semitism. And I told this story about this statue. And I gave that little one-liner. And then he told me how much it costs. And they all laughed. And the class was kind of dismissed on that note. And this lovely elderly gentleman came up to me in private and he said, Brendan, kind of leans in. He said, how much does it cost? And I told him, and he said, we can do that. I'll never forget, he said, Marist, and then he corrected himself. No, he said, Christianity needs this statue. And so it took us 4 years to gather other funds, and we had the statue installed in our campus now just a few years ago. Here is the plaque that I wrote for it. It says, Synagogue and Ecclesia in our time. We at Marist School bear witness to the call God makes to Jews and Christians to embrace the virtues of solidarity and compassion. May this space awaken in our hearts the desire to apply our learning, insight, and innate sympathy to promote understanding among different peoples, religions, and cultures. So, just a couple things, and then we'll get to some questions. Two quick thoughts. This statue is extraordinary. the way it reimagines the profoundly troubling past, and all of us, fully appreciate the power of imagery. But you can all well appreciate that the extraordinariness of this statue is lost on us in many ways, unless we know the history behind it. And I can tell you, as a product of Catholic education myself, I majored in history at the University of Notre Dame, went on to get a master's degree in Catholic theology, and nowhere in any of my schooling was any of this ever taught. I can tell you that whenever I deliver my lecture series on the history of Christian antisemitism, which is a 4-hour lecture series, this is like just a primer, taught over 2 days. I've been teaching this all over the country. When I deliver this lecture series to Christian audiences, it is for them a devastating shock. Most Catholics, to be fair, had never heard of Nostra Aetate. And that has to change. Secondly, you can all well appreciate that it is just not enough to install a statue. As extraordinary as it is. Instead, what we have to be doing, and we, of course, meaning Christians and Jews, what we have to be doing is, of course, this. Learning from each other, getting to know one another. And so in an effort to promote this vision, it took me nearly 3 years to build what I've called the Bearing Witness Institute at Marist School in Atlanta. So I now serve at the school as the director of the Institute. And the hope of the Institute is to provide a kind of professional structure and the funding needed to promote this work. And y'all, I need your help. I do, I need your help. I have been delivering this lecture series, as I say, all over the country. In fact, I have to leave in 30 minutes to catch a flight because I'm lecturing on this history tomorrow in Lexington, Kentucky at a teachers' conference. But whenever I'm invited to speak somewhere, it is always because of word of mouth. And so if you know of any community across the United States or beyond who you think should hear this story, please, I need your help. I regret I forgot to include my contact information on this handout, but you can find me. You know old Google. Just Google Brendan Murphy Bearing Witness Institute, and there's my contact information on our website that we've built. I do have some business cards. I'll leave them up here for you. But please, I need your help. Does that sound good? All right. So with that, I think we have some questions. But before we get to them, can I just lastly say again, thank you guys. Thank you. Wow. Goodness.